I spent 15 years believing my father died in a factory accident, until a billionaire dropped his wallet and revealed that my entire life was a lie built on a dangerous, organized scheme. I just found the key to the truth, but now there is a laser sight dancing on my chest and a text message warning that opening this door will be my final mistake. The rain in this city doesn't wash anything away. It just pushes the grime from the glass towers down into the gutters, where people like me spend their nights. I was huddled under the awning of a closed-down deli, counting the crumpled singles in my pocket, when I saw it. It wasn't some cinematic drop. It was a simple, dark leather wallet, thick and expensive, wedged behind a damp dumpster. When I picked it up, the weight of it felt like a lead brick. Inside, there weren't just credit cards with black plastic finishes or stacks of cash that could pay my rent for the next 5 years. There was a single, engraved metal business card and a photograph. The man in the photo was young, standing in front of a house I hadn't thought about in 15 years. A house that had burned to the ground when I was just a boy. My hands began to tremble so violently that I had to sit down on the wet pavement. I knew the name embossed on that card. Elias Thorne, the titan of industry, the man who owned half the skyline I was currently shivering under. People like him don't lose wallets. They lose entire companies and buy them back before lunch. But why was my father's house in his pocket? I walked for 3 hours, the wallet burning a hole in my jacket. Every instinct screamed at me to toss it into the sewer and vanish, but the curiosity was a poison. I found his office, a monolith of glass that seemed to touch the clouds. The security was tighter than a vault, but I didn't need to get inside. I called the number on the back of the card, my voice cracking as I told his assistant I had found something personal. Within 20 minutes, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit, looking more like an interrogator than a driver, stepped out. He didn't ask questions. He just opened the door and gestured for me to enter. Inside, the leather smelled like money and cold air. Elias Thorne was waiting in a penthouse that felt more like a museum. He didn't look at the wallet when I handed it over. He looked at me. His eyes were pale, calculating, and disturbingly familiar. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, his movements slow and deliberate. He told me he'd been searching for me since the fire, claiming that my father had stolen something from him. Something that wasn't money, but a set of encrypted files that could dismantle his entire organized scheme. "You think your life has been hard because of bad luck, boy?" he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Your father was a high-level courier for a network that didn't just deal in illegal weapons. They dealt in futures. He betrayed them. He betrayed me. And you are the only leverage I have left to find out where those files are hidden." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had lived my entire life thinking my father was a factory worker who died in an accident. Thorne slid a small, rusted key across the mahogany desk. It looked ancient, heavy, and stained with something dark. "That key doesn't open a lock in this city," he whispered. "It opens the truth about why I had to order the hit on your parents. Go to the address on the back of this tag. If you aren't back by dawn, my security team will treat you as a threat to my empire." I left the penthouse with my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The address led me to an abandoned industrial shipyard on the outskirts of town, a place where the fog clung to the rusted cranes like a shroud. I walked through the darkness, the key clutched so tightly in my palm that the metal bit into my skin. I found the locker, number 402, tucked away in the deepest part of the facility. As I slid the key into the lock, the sound of a heavy bolt sliding back echoed through the silence of the shipyard. But just as the door began to creak open, the high-pitched hum of a drone buzzed above me, followed by the blinding sweep of a spotlight. I wasn't alone. From the shadows, 3 figures stepped out, their faces obscured by tactical masks, and one of them raised a silenced pistol. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from an unknown number. "Don't open that locker, or you'll be the next piece of evidence." The laser sight danced across my chest like a restless firefly. I froze, the rusty locker door still slightly ajar, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The figures didn't rush me. They moved with a synchronized, chilling precision that spoke of professional training. They weren't just random thugs. These were ghosts, the kind of operatives Thorne used when he needed to erase a loose end without leaving a paper trail. The cold, metallic scent of the shipyard air seemed to sharpen, intensifying my senses. My pulse thundered in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. "Step away from the unit," one of them commanded, his voice synthesized and stripped of any human cadence. I didn't move. I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on the sliver of space inside the locker, a dark, hollow void that contained the answers to a lifetime of hollow lies. If I turned around, I was dead. If I opened the door fully, I was potentially setting off a chain reaction that would collapse my entire reality. The text on my phone blinked again. "Open it, and you reveal the truth about your father's involvement in the forbidden shipments. Close it, and you live as a pawn." My thumb hovered over the screen. I realized then that Thorne hadn't just sent me here to die. He had sent me here to perform a test. He was watching. Somewhere in the dark, through a camera lens or a thermal scope, the billionaire was observing his leverage decide whether to remain a victim or become a liability. I gripped the handle of the locker tighter. My father wasn't a hero, but he wasn't a coward either. If he had hidden something worth killing over, I had to see it. "I said move!" the operative barked, taking a step forward. The sound of his boots on the concrete was heavy, calculated. I took a gamble. I lunged to the left, throwing myself behind a stack of industrial crates, just as a suppressed thwip splintered the wooden edge where my head had been a microsecond before. I scrambled through the debris, my heart racing, not toward the exit, but deeper into the belly of the shipyard. I knew this territory. As a kid, I used to sneak into these abandoned zones to hide from the foster care recruiters. I pulled the rusted key from my pocket. I had somehow managed to keep hold of it during the dive, and saw that there was a small, embossed serial number on the underside. I ducked into a narrow service crawl space, the smell of salt and decay overwhelming. I needed to see what was in that locker, but I couldn't do it with a bullet in my lung. I crawled through the dark, the sounds of pursuit echoing on the other side of the corrugated walls. I stopped, gasping for air, and looked at the key again. There, in the dim light of a flickering street lamp peering through a crack in the ceiling, I saw an engraving I hadn't noticed before. A small, stylized emblem of a hawk. The exact logo on the signet ring Thorne wore on his pinky finger. It clicked. The key didn't belong to the locker. The key was a remote override. I pulled my phone out again, frantically typing the serial number into the search bar. The signal was weak, but it loaded just enough to pull up a restricted database entry. My eyes widened. It wasn't just a key, it was an activation code for a private security server, a digital backdoor into Thorne's own internal architecture. If I plugged this into any terminal with a hardline connection, I could access his files, his communication logs, and the evidence of the organized scheme he'd been running for decades. I heard the sound of footsteps stopping right above my crawl space. A heavy metallic grate was kicked aside, and a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping over the dust-covered floor. I pressed myself into the shadows, barely breathing. The person above stopped, their boots right next to my hiding spot. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need to fight back, but my hand brushed against something cold and hard, tucked into the corner of the crawl space. A heavy, weathered toolbox. I gripped the handle, ready to strike, when a voice from above spoke into a headset. "Target is cornered in the Sector 4 basement. He has the override. Execute the protocol. Leave no trace of the boy or the evidence." The floorboards groaned above me as someone jumped down. I didn't wait. I lunged upward, swinging the metal toolbox with every ounce of strength I had. But just as I made contact, a second, stronger set of hands grabbed me from behind, yanking me backward into the darkness of the pipe tunnels. A cold hand clamped over my mouth, and a voice whispered directly into my ear. "Don't scream, unless you want to spend your last minute staring at the barrel of a weapon. I'm the only one here who isn't trying to kill you." The figure turned me around, and the flashlight beam hit their face. My breath hitched. It was a woman I had seen in my father's old photos, the woman who was supposed to have died in the fire with him, looking exactly as young and terrified as she did 15 years ago. She stared at me, tears welling in her eyes, and whispered, "You shouldn't have come back here, son." The world tilted on its axis. The woman standing before me was a ghost rendered in flesh and blood. The mother I had laid to rest in a shallow grave of memory. The woman whose face had haunted my nightmares for half a lifetime. She looked not a day older than the afternoon the flames consumed our lives. Her hair pulled back in that same frantic knot, her eyes holding that specific, terrifying intensity I had spent years trying to forget. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the hand clamped over my mouth held me in a grip of iron. "Lower your voice," she hissed, her eyes darting to the service hatch where the metallic clatter of the pursuers was growing louder. "Thorne's men are listening to the vibrations in the floorboards. If they find us, there is no escape. The organized scheme he runs doesn't just eliminate people, it deletes them from history." She dragged me deeper into the labyrinth of pipes, moving with a silent, feline grace that defied the cramped, claustrophobic environment. We navigated a maze of rusted conduits and leaking steam vents that hissed like serpents. Every time the heavy thud of combat boots echoed from the main corridor, she pushed me deeper into the shadows, her body shielding mine. Finally, she pulled me through a rotted maintenance door into a sub-level control room that hadn't been touched in decades. The room was bathed in the dull, rhythmic pulse of an ancient server rack, a flickering amber light that illuminated a wall covered in photos, schematics, and news clippings. My stomach turned. There were pictures of me, taken from a distance, over the course of the last 10 years. I was in the library, at my crummy job, sleeping on that park bench. Someone had been watching me, documenting my every failure, my every descent into poverty. "You're alive," I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "Everyone said—" "The fire investigators said there were 2 bodies." "There were 2 bodies," she said, her voice devoid of emotion as she began typing rapidly into a terminal. "But neither of them were ours. Your father was a brilliant engineer, but he made the mistake of thinking he could blackmail a man who controls the local justice system. We were forced to go underground, to live as specters while Thorne climbed the ladder of industry on the back of the very data your father stole." "The key," I said, pulling it from my pocket. "He gave it to me. He told me to open the locker." She stopped typing, her eyes locking onto the metal object in my hand. Her face went pale, a look of genuine horror crossing her features. "That's not an override key, you fool. It's a tracker. It's a beacon for their tactical units. By bringing that here, you've led them directly to the last stronghold of the underground resistance." As if on cue, the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs groaned under the pressure of a hydraulic ram. Thud, thud, thud. Each impact echoed through the room like a death knell. She scrambled to grab a bag hidden behind the server, shoving a heavy, cold piece of illegal metal into my hands. I'd never held a weapon in my life, and the weight of it felt like a curse. "Listen to me," she said, grabbing my shoulders, her grip bruising. "Thorne isn't just a billionaire. He's the architect of a system designed to ensure no one like us ever rises to the surface. That key contains the access codes to the internal communication logs of his entire group. If you insert it into this terminal, we can broadcast the truth to every news station in the state. But once the signal goes out, they won't just come for us. They'll trigger a lockdown that will wipe this entire shipyard off the map." The door buckled inward, sparks showering the concrete. I looked at the terminal, then at the key, then at the woman who had returned from the dead to drag me into a war I didn't understand. "If we do this," I said, my voice trembling, "we don't get a life after today, do we?" She smiled, a sad, broken thing. "We never had a life, son. We had an existence. This is our chance to change it." The hinges of the door finally gave way, twisting like molten wax. Through the smoke, I saw the tactical flashlights cutting through the air, dozens of them, blinding and relentless. My mother pushed me toward the console, her back to the door, pulling a blade from her coat. "Insert the key, now!" I slammed the key into the slot and watched the screen flicker to life. A progress bar appeared. Uploading encrypted data, 1%, 2%. Suddenly, a voice boomed over the speakers, cold and amplified, echoing throughout the entire facility. It was Thorne. "Did you really think the boy was your salvation, Sarah? He was just the courier. And you, my dear, have just delivered the final piece of the puzzle directly into my hands." Behind me, the wall of the basement exploded inward. A team of men in tactical gear swarmed the room, but they weren't aiming at us. They were aiming at the server. My mother let out a strangled cry as the lead operative stepped over the debris, pointing a device that began to pulse with a blue electromagnetic hum. "The server is being remotely wiped," the operative announced, "and the boy is under arrest for attempted extortion and possession of illicit materials. The state will take care of the rest." I reached for the keyboard, desperate to stop the wipe, but the screen went black. I turned to look at my mother, but she was gone, vanished into the smoke and the chaos of the room. A hand slammed me against the wall, the cold metal of handcuffs biting into my wrists. As they dragged me toward the door, I saw a familiar black sedan idling outside in the rain. Thorne stepped out, his umbrella held by a guard, and looked at me with a sickening, triumphant grin. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper against the rain. "You almost played your part perfectly, kid. But you forgot one thing. In this world, the truth is whatever the man with the most money decides it is." He held up a burner phone, and on the screen, I saw a live video feed of my apartment, the place I'd just left, being doused in gasoline. "Now," he whispered, "do you want to tell me where your father is hiding, or shall we start by burning the rest of your history to the ground?" The rain slicked his suit, reflecting the orange glow of the distant city lights, but his eyes remained as cold and stagnant as the dark water surrounding the docks. I stood there, shivering, my wrists chafing against the steel bands, watching my meager life, my clothes, my books, the only photos I had left of my childhood, begin to vanish into the hungry mouth of the flames on his phone screen. He wasn't just destroying my belongings, he was erasing the tangible proof that I had ever existed, trying to reduce my world to ash before he decided whether to finish the job on me. "I don't know where he is," I spat, the words tasting like copper. "I haven't seen him in 15 years. Thorne laughed, a dry, rasping sound that lacked any warmth. "You were never the sharpest tool in the shed, but you were always the most stubborn. It's a shame. You have your mother's defiance, but you lack her tactical foresight. She knows exactly where he is, and she knows that if she wants you to breathe another day, she'll have to crawl out from whatever hole she's been hiding in." He gestured to his men, and they shoved me into the back of the sedan. The leather was freezing, and the air inside was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and something chemical, the smell of the prohibited substances his network moved through the shipping lanes. As the car pulled away, leaving the burning shipyard behind, I realized that I hadn't been arrested by the police. These were private contractors, men who existed outside the law, a shadow force operating under the protection of his influence. We didn't head toward a police station. We drove toward the mountains, toward the sprawling, secluded estates that sat like fortresses above the fog. I spent the entire ride trying to think, trying to find a way out, but the lock on the door was electronic, and the guard sitting beside me kept his hand resting casually on his waistband. I looked down at my hands. In the chaos of the scuffle, I had managed to snag something from the desk before the guards hit me. A small, silver memory drive that had been ejected from the terminal before the wipe. It was tiny, hidden in the palm of my hand. If I could get to a computer, if I could just get 5 minutes of access, I could leak everything. The car slowed as we approached a massive gate. Thorne looked at me through the rearview mirror, his gaze lingering on my hands. "You're clenching your fist, boy. Is there something you're holding on to, or is it just the fear settling in?" "I'm just cold," I lied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking through my veins. "It gets colder," he remarked, turning back to the road. We pulled into the garage of a mansion that seemed to carve a jagged hole in the skyline. I was led out, marched through a marble foyer, and thrown into a room that was clearly a private study. It was filled with antique books, a roaring fireplace, and a massive wall of monitors. Thorne sat behind his desk, looking like a king in his counting house. He didn't lock the door. He didn't need to. The windows were reinforced glass, and the drop outside was a sheer cliff face overlooking a canyon. "You're going to sit here," Thorne said, leaning back. "And you are going to call your mother on this secure line. You are going to tell her that you are safe, that you've escaped the shipyard, and that you need to meet at the old cabin in the valley. If you deviate from the script, I will send the teams to every foster home, every shelter, and every associate you've ever had contact with in the last decade. I will make sure everyone who ever shared a meal with you pays for your father's sins." He tossed a burner phone onto the desk. My hands shook as I reached for it. This was the moment. I had the drive in one hand and the phone in the other. If I called, I was leading my mother into a trap. If I didn't, I was signing the death warrants of everyone I had ever known. But as I glanced at the monitors behind him, I saw something that stopped my heart. A live feed from inside the mansion's security room. Someone was there, cutting the camera feeds one by one. A shadow moved across the screen. It was her. My mother hadn't fled. She had infiltrated the heart of the beast. I looked at Thorne, who was busy pouring another drink, his back turned to the screen. I saw my mother on the monitor, reaching for the main power breaker, her hand hovering over the switch that would plunge the entire estate into total darkness. She looked at the camera, straight at me, and mouthed one word: "Run." I realized what was about to happen. She wasn't trying to save me by negotiation. She was going to burn the house down with both of us inside, a final act of retribution to stop Thorne for good. The lights flickered. Thorne turned, his brow furrowing as the main chandelier above us buzzed and groaned. "What did you do?" he snarled, dropping his glass. The room went black as a massive surge of power hit the grid. Sparks showered from the ceiling, and the alarm system shrieked, a high-pitched, disorienting sound that filled the room. I didn't wait. I lunged for the desk, slamming the memory drive into the emergency port of the terminal, hoping to trigger an automated upload before the system crashed for good. Uploading. 10%. 20%. Thorne lunged for me in the dark, his fingers digging into my shoulder. "You little rat!" he roared. He slammed me against the wall, but I could hear the sound of a heavy steel door sliding open behind us. A silhouette stood in the doorway, framed by the moonlight hitting the hallway. My mother, holding a flare gun pointed directly at the curtains, which were already damp with a pungent, flammable liquid. "Step away from him, Elias," she said, her voice echoing with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. Thorne stiffened, his grip on my neck loosening. "Sarah, you've been a ghost for so long, I thought you'd forgotten how to fight." "I forgot how to live," she replied, her thumb pulling back the hammer of the flare gun. "But I never forgot the night you took everything. Let him go, or we all go out together." Thorne smiled, slowly reaching into his jacket. "You won't pull that trigger. You don't have the stomach for it." "She doesn't have to," I gasped, pointing to the screen. The upload bar hit 90%. "It's already going public. Your entire organized scheme, your offshore accounts, the names of every official you've bribed. It's all being distributed to every major news outlet and social media server as we speak." Thorne's face turned a shade of sickly gray. He didn't look at the monitor. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He pulled a small black object from his pocket, a detonator, and held it up. "If I go down, the estate goes down. I've rigged this place with enough gas to turn this mountain into a crater. You think you've won? You've just ensured that none of us leave this room alive." He pressed the button, and the floor beneath us suddenly gave way. The world didn't just collapse. It dissolved. As the floor gave way, the roar of shifting timber and fracturing concrete became a deafening vacuum. For a heartbeat, There was the sensation of weightlessness, a terrifying suspension between the life I had known as a gutter dweller and the truth I had finally unearthed. I felt my mother's hand reach out, her fingers locking with mine, a frantic, desperate anchor in the descent. We plummeted into the darkened crawl spaces beneath the study, crashing through piles of construction debris and insulation. The explosion wasn't a singular blast, but a chain reaction. Thorne's contingency, a self-destruct mechanism designed to bury his secrets in the bedrock, ripped through the mansion's lower levels. Dust choked the air, thick and metallic, and the sound of falling masonry drowned out everything. I landed hard, my shoulder slamming into a support beam, the air punched from my lungs. But the drive. I kept the drive pressed against my chest, shielding it as if it were my own heartbeat. We scrambled through the wreckage, guided by the orange flickers of growing fires. My mother didn't say a word, her movements sharp and efficient as she navigated the collapsed ruins. We reached a maintenance tunnel I had seen on the building schematics, the final exit point. As we burst out into the cool, damp night air of the mountainside, we didn't look back. We ran until the mansion was nothing more than a silhouette against the inferno, a titan finally brought to its knees by its own hubris. When we finally stopped, kilometers away, the silence of the woods felt deafening. The sun was beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in colors that felt like a mockery of the carnage we had escaped. My mother knelt on the damp earth, her hands shaking as she pulled a satellite phone from her coat. She didn't call for help. She dialed a series of numbers that I realized were the private lines of the regional investigative authorities. Not the ones under Thorne's thumb, but the Internal Security Oversight Board that had been waiting for a lead for a decade. "The evidence is being broadcast," she said, her voice finally breaking. "Check the network servers. The file name is Legacy." Within minutes, the world began to change. We sat in the tall grass, watching the first of the police sirens cut through the valley below. The news feeds on our phones started updating, first in fragments, then in a deluge. The organized scheme that had controlled the city, the illegal shipments, the bribes, the people Thorne had disappeared. It was all there, laid bare for the entire world to see. I watched as headlines flashed across my screen, announcing raids on Thorne's headquarters, the freezing of his assets, and the arrest of every high-level official he had kept in his pocket. Thorne didn't escape. As the cameras arrived, they captured the image of him being led out of the perimeter of his own burning estate, his suit ruined, his arrogance finally replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. He wasn't just being arrested, he was being erased from the power structure he had so ruthlessly built. The huge term of imprisonment he was facing was only the beginning of a legacy of shame that would follow him into whatever dark corner the justice system shoved him into. My mother looked at me, her eyes weary but finally clear. She pulled a small, worn photograph from her pocket, the same one I had seen in that wallet all those lifetimes ago. She handed it to me. It was a picture of my father, standing on a beach, smiling with a genuine, unburdened joy I had never seen before. "He's waiting at the border," she whispered. "He didn't run because he was a coward. He ran to buy us the time to finish what he started." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the memory drive in my hand, then at the sunrise. The anger, the hunger, the desperation of the last 15 years. It all felt like a fever dream I was finally waking up from. I wasn't the boy who lived under a deli awning anymore. I was the person who had pulled the curtain back on a billionaire's empire and lived to tell the tale. "We go to him?" I asked. She nodded, taking my hand. "We go to him, and we never look back at the city again." As we walked down the mountain path, the sirens grew louder, a chorus of justice that finally sounded like a lullaby. The nightmare was over. The key Thorne had given me hadn't opened a locker. It had opened the door to the rest of my life. I dropped the rusted key into the deep ravine beside the path, watching it disappear into the shadows. I didn't need it anymore. I had the truth. I had my family, and for the first time in my existence, I had a future that was entirely my own to write. The billionaire had tried to break me, to use me as a pawn in his game of shadows, but he had underestimated the one thing money couldn't buy: the resilience of a life that has nothing left to lose. I took a deep breath of the clean mountain air, turned my back on the burning past, and started walking toward a horizon that was finally, truly, mine.